Have you ever noticed how the quietest person in a room suddenly becomes the most dangerous the moment they stop explaining themselves? You don't have to fight a narcissist to terrify them. You just have to stop reacting. The scariest thing to a manipulator isn't your anger, it's your silence, your peace, your complete indifference to their chaos. The empath who spent years apologizing for simply existing eventually reaches a point where even speaking feels too expensive. Not because they've given up, but because they've finally woken up. And when that happens, the narcissist has nowhere left to hide. Meet Amanda. She was the classic empath, intuitive, giving, always understanding. She could read a room better than she could read herself. In every relationship, romantic or otherwise, she heard the same refrain. You're too sensitive. You're too emotional. You overthink everything. So she learned to shrink, to apologize for her intensity, to dim her light so others wouldn't squint. For 32 years, Amanda was the translator for everyone else's pain. The emotional garbage disposal. The one who absorbed the room's anxiety so everyone else could breathe easier. But something shifted last Tuesday morning. It wasn't dramatic. No screaming match or earth-shattering betrayal. Amanda just sat at her kitchen table, hands wrapped around a cold mug of coffee, staring at her phone after another manipulative text from her ex, and whispered to the empty room, "I don't want to explain myself anymore." That's it. That simple sentence. But in that moment, something ancient inside her, something that had been holding its breath for decades, finally exhaled. Because what narcissists fear most isn't the empath's breakdown. It's their breakthrough. The moment they stop playing a game they never agreed to play. Carl Jung called this moment the collision with the shadow, that jarring instant when we come face to face with the parts of ourselves we've been desperately trying to hide, even from ourselves. But for empaths like Amanda, the Carl Jung shadow isn't rage or cruelty or malice. It's something far more threatening to their carefully constructed identity. The earth-shattering truth that they've been complicit in their own suffering. Not intentionally, never that, but through the simple act of surviving in a world that taught them their worth was conditional on their usefulness to others. You see, every empath wears what Jung called the persona, a carefully crafted mask. Amanda's persona was the helpful one, the emotional first aid kit with legs, the human safe haven where everyone could dump their problems and walk away lighter while she grew heavier. Her persona smiled when her soul was screaming, comforted others while quietly suffocating, became whatever the room needed while completely forgetting what she needed. For Amanda, this mask felt like survival. Growing up in a chaotic household where her mother's moods determined the family's emotional weather, little Amanda learned that her value lay in her ability to sense the storm coming and become whatever was needed to calm it. Happy Amanda when mom was depressed. Invisible Amanda when dad was drinking. Perfect Amanda when her parents were fighting. She carried this programming into every relationship, romantic and otherwise. With her ex David, Amanda became the translator for his emotional immaturity. When he screamed at waiters, she'd apologize and overtip. When he gave her the silent treatment for days, she'd send care packages and love letters. When he cheated and blamed her for being too needy, she went to therapy to work on her neediness. But underneath that helpful, accommodating persona lived Amanda's shadow, the part that was bone-deep exhausted, quietly resentful, and absolutely done being everyone's emotional janitor. The part that whispered dangerous truths in the middle of sleepless nights. I'm tired of being strong for everyone else. I don't want to fix people who refuse to fix themselves. I don't want to be needed. I want to be seen. I don't want to be useful. I want to be loved for who I am, not what I do. This internal war between her persona and her shadow created what Jung called a complex, a split in the psyche that generates intense emotional charge. Amanda felt it as a constant underlying tension, like living with a foot on the gas and brake simultaneously. Part of her desperately wanted to keep helping, to keep giving, to keep being the good one. Another part wanted to burn down every relationship that required her to betray herself. The collision came that Tuesday morning because Amanda, could no longer ignore what her shadow had been trying to tell her for years. She had taught people how to treat her by accepting the unacceptable, by explaining away their cruelty as misunderstanding, by making herself smaller so they could feel bigger, by apologizing for having needs, wants, boundaries, feelings. She had become what Jung called the container for everyone else's projected shadow material. Their guilt, their shame, their unprocessed rage, their emotional immaturity. She absorbed what they couldn't face in themselves and then spent her energy trying to transform their poison into understanding. The moment Amanda whispered those 6 words, "I don't want to explain myself anymore," her shadow and persona began the delicate, terrifying process of integration. Not fusion, which would be dangerous, but conscious dialogue. The helpful part acknowledging the exhausted part. The giving part honoring the depleted part. The loving part finally extending that same love inward. Jung wrote, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls." Amanda realized she had been doing everything, no matter how painful, to avoid disappointing others. But when an empath stops absorbing other people's shadows, stops being their emotional dumping ground, stops carrying what isn't theirs to carry, something remarkable happens. Those people have no choice but to confront what they have been avoiding. Their own emptiness, their own pain, their own responsibility for their emotional landscape. And that's when the narcissist realizes they're dealing with someone completely different. Someone who won't be baited, won't be triggered, won't be used as a repository for their unresolved trauma. Someone who has remembered, after decades of forgetting, exactly who they are underneath all that helpful performance. Take a moment here, before we go deeper. Notice what's stirring inside you right now as you listen to Amanda's story. What mask are you wearing that's gotten too heavy to hold up? What part of yourself have you silenced just to feel loved? What would it cost you to stop explaining yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding you? Because here's what Amanda discovered, and what you're about to understand. The empath's greatest power isn't in giving endlessly from an empty cup. It's in finally filling their own cup first, and then choosing consciously who deserves to drink from the overflow. So what happens when an empath like Amanda stops reacting to narcissistic behavior? Something that sends manipulators into complete existential panic. They become irrelevant. The person who once over-explained now sits in comfortable, unshakable silence. The one who cried to prove they cared now looks you in the eye and says absolutely nothing. The one who used to absorb your guilt, your shame, your projected rage now holds up a mirror and walks away without a backward glance. Jung called this phenomenon projection deflection. The moment a conscious individual stops being a dumping ground for other people's unprocessed emotional waste. It's psychological alchemy, transforming from lead into gold, from reactive to responsive, from victim to sovereign. Let me show you exactly what this looked like in Amanda's life. Her ex-boyfriend David was a textbook covert narcissist, though she didn't have that language yet. For 3 years, he had masterfully trained her to dance to his emotional chaos. One passive-aggressive text could ruin her entire weekend. One episode of silent treatment could send her spiraling into self-doubt, so severe she'd call in sick to work. One accusation of being too sensitive could make her question her own sanity. David had weaponized Amanda's empathy against her. He knew exactly which buttons to push to get her to apologize for things she didn't do, to over-explain innocent actions, to perform elaborate emotional labor to prove she was worthy of basic respect. He had turned her greatest strength, her ability to understand and forgive, into her greatest vulnerability. But after Amanda's kitchen table awakening, something fundamental shifted in her nervous system. The old pathways of reaction had been interrupted. Where once there was automatic accommodation, now there was conscious choice. David's first test came exactly 48 hours later. A breadcrumb text designed to hoover her back into his emotional tornado. "I miss what we had, Amanda. I've been thinking about that weekend in Portland. You know I never meant to hurt you. I was just scared of how much I loved you." Old Amanda would have dissected this message for hours. She would have called her sister to analyze every word, wondering if she'd been too harsh in their last fight, making elaborate excuses for his previous cruelty, crafting the perfect response that proved she was evolved and understanding while secretly hoping it would make him see her worth. New Amanda read it, felt a brief flicker of the old programming trying to activate, and then nothing. No spike in heart rate, no flood of memories, no urgency to respond. She felt the way you might feel reading a spam email, mildly annoyed at the intrusion, but fundamentally unbothered. She deleted it without responding. The silence that followed wasn't passive-aggressive or calculated. It wasn't a strategy or a game. It was genuine indifference born from clarity. Amanda had reached what Jung called the transcendent function, the ability to hold tension between opposing forces without collapsing into unconscious reaction. David tried again 3 days later, escalating to guilt and victimization. "I can't believe you're ignoring me after everything we meant to each other. This isn't like you, Amanda. You were always the one who believed in second chances. Your friends are asking why you won't talk to me. This is embarrassing for both of us." Old Amanda would have broken, would have rushed to reassure him that she wasn't trying to embarrass him, that she did believe in second chances, that maybe she was being too harsh. She would have absorbed his shame and made it her responsibility to manage. New Amanda recognized every manipulation technique immediately. The false intimacy, everything we meant to each other, the character assassination disguised as concern, "This isn't like you," the social pressure, "Your friends are asking," the shared responsibility for his feelings, embarrassing for both of us. She deleted this message too. Then came the rage phase, right on schedule. "You're being completely psychotic with this silent treatment. This is emotional abuse, Amanda. I never thought you were the type of person who could be so cruel. You're proving that I was right about you being unstable." And here's where the real magic happened. Old Amanda would have shattered, would have spent days crafting a defense, proving she wasn't psychotic or abusive or cruel or unstable. She would have apologized for enforcing a boundary, justified her need for space, explained her side of every past argument. New Amanda felt something she'd never experienced in response to David's rage: pity. Not the codependent, enabling kind that had trapped her for years, but the clean kind that comes from seeing someone clearly. She saw a scared, wounded person desperately trying to make her responsible for his emotional regulation. Someone so terrified of abandonment that he'd rather have negative attention than none at all. Someone so disconnected from his own inner world that he needed her reactions to feel real. She didn't take the bait. She didn't defend herself against false accusations. She didn't explain her boundaries or justify her choices. Instead, she did something that terrified him more than anger or tears ever could. She felt genuinely sorry for him and moved on with her day. Because here's what Amanda finally understood, and what every awakening empath must reckon with. Hurt people, but healed people don't engage with hurt people who are committed to staying hurt. The fed-up empath doesn't become cruel or vengeful. They become discerning. They don't seek to punish or teach lessons. They seek peace. And their peace is so threatening to people addicted to chaos that it becomes the most powerful form of self-protection imaginable. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." For Amanda, becoming who she truly was meant shedding every apologetic, people-pleasing, peacekeeping mask she'd worn to survive in a world that punished her authenticity. What she found underneath wasn't broken or damaged or too much. She found someone worthy of love without earning it, worthy of respect without begging for it, worthy of peace without negotiating for it. She found herself, whole, complete, and for the first time in 32 years, finally free. Amanda's transformation wasn't a dramatic explosion. It was more like watching a Polaroid photograph develop, gradual, inevitable, beautiful in its unfolding. She didn't slam doors or burn bridges in spectacular fashion. She didn't make announcements or write scathing social media posts about toxic people. Instead, she began living like someone who had finally remembered their own worth. And that quiet revolution was more threatening to manipulative people than any loud confrontation could have been. The changes started small. Amanda stopped being the first to text in friendships that had felt increasingly one-sided. She stopped defending her intentions to people who were committed to misunderstanding her. She stopped solving problems she hadn't created. She stopped saying sorry as punctuation in conversations. She stopped performing gratitude for treatment that should have been basic human decency. Most importantly, she stopped needing closure from people who had never given her peace. This is where Jung's concept of individuation becomes practical rather than philosophical. Individuation isn't about becoming perfect or transcending human emotion. It's about becoming whole, integrating all the parts of yourself, including the ones that were labeled too much or too sensitive or too complicated, and choosing to honor them rather than hide them. For Amanda, this integration looked like sitting with her anger instead of immediately trying to alchemize it into understanding. Anger, she discovered, wasn't the destructive force she'd been taught to fear. It was directional. It pointed toward her values, her boundaries, her non-negotiables. It was information about what mattered to her, not a character flaw to overcome. She started saying no without elaborate justifications. I won't be able to make it, instead of a paragraph explaining her work schedule, her sleep schedule, her emotional bandwidth, her financial constraints. Just clean boundaries without apology or negotiation. She started choosing herself in quiet, consistent ways that felt radical after decades of self-abandonment. Taking a bath instead of immediately responding to texts. Going to bed at a reasonable hour instead of staying up to manage someone else's crisis. Buying herself flowers without needing a special occasion or someone else's permission. She started trusting her intuition, that inner voice she'd been taught to doubt, dismiss, and override in favor of being reasonable or giving people the benefit of the doubt. Her nervous system knew things her rational mind hadn't caught up to yet. She learned to listen, and something genuinely magical began happening. The right people not only stayed, they celebrated this version of Amanda. Her colleague Marcus, who had always appreciated her depth, started inviting her to more meaningful conversations. Her neighbor Sophia began asking for her honest opinion instead of just her validation. Her sister Carmen, initially threatened by Amanda's new boundaries, eventually admitted she respected her more than ever. But the takers, the users, the emotional vampires, they scattered like roaches when someone flips on the lights. They couldn't survive in an environment where their behavior was seen clearly, named accurately, and not enabled or absorbed. David's reaction was predictably escalatory. When silence didn't work, he tried hoovering with promises of change. I've been seeing a therapist, Amanda. I'm working on my communication patterns. You were right about a lot of things. I miss us. Old Amanda would have been tempted, would have wondered if she was making a mistake, throwing away someone who was finally willing to grow. She might have agreed to coffee, just to talk, secretly hoping this time would be different. New Amanda saw the pattern clearly. David wasn't in therapy because he recognized his abusive behavior and wanted to heal. He was in therapy because losing his supply source, her, had caused him discomfort. The moment she took him back, the moment her boundaries relaxed, he would revert to form. Because his apologies weren't about accountability, they were about access. When the hoovering didn't work, David moved to threats. You'll never find anyone who understands you like I do, Amanda. You're too intense for most people. Too emotional. I was the only one who accepted that about you. This message would have devastated Amanda 6 months earlier. It would have triggered every insecurity about being too much that she'd carried since childhood. She might have crawled back just to avoid the terror of being alone with her intensity. But Amanda had done the work Carl Jung shadow work. She had made friends with her own shadow. She no longer experienced her emotional depth as a liability. She saw it as rare and valuable. Her intensity wasn't a bug in her programming. It was a feature. Her sensitivity wasn't a weakness to overcome. It was a superpower to wield consciously. More importantly, Amanda had learned to distinguish between understanding and accepting. David had understood that she was emotional and used that understanding to manipulate her. True acceptance would have looked like cherishing her emotional range, protecting her sensitive nature, celebrating her intuitive gifts. Amanda blocked his number, not in anger, not as punishment, but as an act of self-preservation. She was no longer available for relationships that required her to betray herself. The fed-up empath becomes the narcissist's worst nightmare, not through revenge or retaliation, but through something far more powerful: complete disengagement. When you stop feeding the drama starves. When you stop absorbing their projections, they're forced to sit with their own discomfort. When you stop explaining yourself to people who aren't listening, the conversation simply ends. And in that ending, Amanda found her beginning. Healing, Amanda discovered, doesn't always look heroic. Sometimes it looks embarrassingly ordinary. Sometimes it looks like sitting in her favorite coffee shop, the same one where she and David used to have those circular arguments that left her feeling crazy and realizing she felt nothing but gratitude for the silence. The peace. The absence of someone else's emotional chaos colonizing her nervous system. Sometimes it looked like getting a text designed to trigger guilt or fear and feeling only mild irritation at the interruption to her actual life. Not the performance of life she'd been living, but her real, authentic, messy, beautiful life. Sometimes it looked like choosing herself in ways that felt boring but revolutionary. Going to bed when she was tired instead of staying up to manage someone else's insomnia. Eating what her body craved instead of what others expected. Spending Saturday alone reading instead of forcing herself to be social when solitude felt sacred. Carl Jung said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." For empaths who've spent decades being everything to everyone else, self-acceptance feels like the most radical act imaginable. Amanda started treating herself the way she'd always treated others, with patience, compassion, and unwavering support. She became her own nurturing parent, her own wise friend, her own fierce protector. When her inner critic attacked her for being selfish or difficult, she responded the way she would to a beloved friend experiencing self-doubt, with gentleness and perspective. She bought herself flowers every Friday, not because she needed flowers, but because she deserved beauty for no reason other than being alive. She took herself on solo dates to museums and bookstores and restaurants, learning to enjoy her own company without the anxiety of whether others found her worthy of theirs. She said no to social gatherings when her soul craved solitude, and yes to adventures when her spirit felt ready to expand. She stopped explaining these choices to people who wouldn't make the same ones. She stopped performing her healing journey for other people's comfort or understanding. Because here's what Amanda learned. When you've been everyone else's emotional caretaker, people get profoundly uncomfortable when you start taking care of yourself. They mistake your boundaries for punishment, your self-respect for arrogance, your peace for passive aggression, your authenticity for a personal attack. But Jung taught that other people's projections are just more material to deflect rather than absorb. Their discomfort with your healing journey is not your responsibility to manage, fix, or soothe. Amanda's mother, Patricia, who had unconsciously trained her daughter to be the family's emotional manager from age 5, couldn't understand the transformation. "You're different, Mija. Colder. What happened to my sweet, understanding Amanda?" "I'm not colder, Mom," Amanda replied with surprising gentleness. "I'm clearer. I'm still understanding, but now I understand myself too." Her former best friend Jessica accused her of thinking she was too good for everyone after Amanda stopped being available for 4-hour phone calls about the same relationship drama on repeat. "Ever since you did that therapy thing, you've gotten all high and mighty. Not everyone can afford to be as selective as you." "I'm not too good for anyone," Amanda said calmly. "I'm just finally good enough for myself." These conversations hurt, but differently than before. Old Amanda would have collapsed, would have rushed to prove she wasn't cold or selfish or superior. She would have abandoned her boundaries to maintain these relationships, even if they were slowly killing her authentic self. New Amanda felt sad for the loss, but she didn't feel guilty. She understood that some relationships can only survive when one person remains small, and she was no longer willing to shrink to fit into spaces that had no room for wholeness. The empath who once feared being too much had become genuinely untouchable, not because she'd grown hard or cruel, but because she'd integrated her shadow and claimed her light simultaneously. She could hold space for other people's pain without absorbing it as her own. She could offer support without sacrificing her stability. She could love others without losing herself. She learned to sit with discomfort, both her own and others, without rushing to fix it. She learned that other people's emotions, while valid, were not her emergency unless she chose to make them so. She learned that love doesn't require you to disappear, that intimacy doesn't demand self-betrayal, that kindness doesn't mean being endlessly available for use. Most beautifully, Amanda learned to parent herself with the same devotion she'd given to everyone else. When she felt scared, she comforted herself. When she felt angry, she listened to what the anger was protecting. When she felt sad, she allowed the grief without trying to immediately transform it into wisdom or forgiveness. This version of Amanda didn't walk around announcing her transformation or warning people about her new standards. She didn't need to broadcast her boundaries or explain her evolution. Her energy spoke for itself. Her presence hummed with quiet, unshakable power. Her silence echoed with hard-earned self-respect. Her peace disturbed people who lived in perpetual chaos. And when toxic individuals encountered this integrated version of Amanda, they didn't just feel rejected, they felt completely exposed. Because someone who won't absorb projections forces you to sit with your own emotional waste. Someone who won't enable dysfunction forces you to confront your own patterns. Someone who won't react to provocations forces you to examine why you need others' pain to feel powerful. The healed empath becomes a walking mirror that reflects unvarnished truth back to everyone they encounter. For healthy people, this feels warm, authentic, refreshing. For disordered individuals, this feels threatening and unbearable, which is exactly why the awakened empath becomes the narcissist's worst nightmare. Not through any aggressive action they take, but through the self-possessed person they've become. Someone who can't be manipulated because they know their worth. Someone who can't be controlled because they've learned to trust themselves. Someone who can't be used because they've developed discernment between genuine connection and emotional extraction. Amanda had become the thing narcissists fear most. Someone who didn't need their validation, wouldn't accept their abuse, and couldn't be convinced to betray themselves for the promise of conditional love. She had become herself. Finally, fully, unapologetically herself. If you're an empath reading this, tired of being everyone's emotional support system, done with explaining yourself to people who aren't listening, let this be your permission slip. You don't owe anyone your explanations. Your worth was never determined by your usefulness. You're not here to fix broken people who refuse to heal themselves. You're here to come home to yourself. Carl Jung's shadow teaches us that when we integrate our shadow, when we accept the parts of ourselves we've been taught to hide, we become whole. Not perfect, but sovereign. Not reactive, but responsive. Not afraid, but awake. And when the empath awakens, they don't need revenge. Their peace is loud enough. Their boundaries are clear enough. Their presence is powerful enough. Your sensitivity isn't a flaw to fix, it's a gift to honor. Your intensity isn't too much, it's exactly enough for the right people. Your depth isn't overwhelming, it's rare and valuable. So if you've reached your breaking point, maybe you're not breaking. Maybe you're finally becoming. The world needs empaths who know their worth, who set boundaries with love, who give from overflow rather than emptiness, who choose themselves without apology. You don't have to shout to be heard. You don't have to prove yourself to be valuable. You don't have to shrink to make others comfortable. When you stop trying to make toxic people understand you, that silence, that peaceful, powerful indifference becomes your greatest protection. Take a moment right now. Put your hand on your heart. Feel it beating. That rhythm belongs to you, not to everyone who needs something from you. not to everyone who wants to shape you into what serves them. Jung said the privilege of a lifetime is becoming who you truly are. Your lifetime is now. Your becoming is now. Stop explaining. Start existing. The right people will understand. The wrong people don't matter. And remember, when you become unshakably yourself, you give other empaths permission to do the same. Your healing creates ripples. Your boundaries inspire others. Your peace becomes a beacon. Welcome home to yourself. You've been missed.